Welcome to the next video in the Suggestion App course. This is a complete course where we'll build a .NET 6 Blazor server application with MongoDB from the ground up. There are three things you need to know before we get started. First, this is part of a series, and this isn't the first video in the series. If you're just starting out, you should check out the playlist that's linked in the description to start from the first video in the series. Second, this course is actually a paid course. MongoDB sponsored it so you can put the videos on YouTube for free. Check out the link in the description to sign up for MongoDB Atlas for free to thank them if you haven't already. Third, you can also buy this course on IamTimCorey.com. The link is in the description. Buying this course will get you all the lessons right away, the source code for each lesson, a certificate of completion, offline access, and more. It also helps sponsor more free content. The video will be the same as it is on YouTube, so feel free to watch the free version if you want to. Okay, let's jump into today's video. Note there may be more than one lesson in this video, since some lessons are short. Let's start building our project by creating a Blazor server project. Let's create a new project. We're going to choose Blazor server app. I have one over here in the recently used templates, but you can find it in the list as well. Make sure it's Blazor server though, and not Blazor WebAssembly. We hit next, and I'm going to call this the Suggestion App UI for the project name, since it's the user interface. And we're going to call this the Suggestion App for the solution name. From there, we hit next. And we're going to choose .NET 6 long-term support, no authentication. Even though we will be using authentication, we're not going to choose to enable authentication here. We're going to do things a different way using Azure Active Directory B2C. That'll be different. So we're not going to use authentication here. We are going to configure this for HTTPS. So let's enable that. We're not going to use Docker for this course. We hit create. And this will create for us the basic project. Now, the first thing you should always do when you create a new project like this is start it up, make sure it actually launches. So let's hit run and just make sure that everything launches and works the way it should. Wait for it to be done. And it launched off screen, of course. There we go. So here is the standard Blazor application. We're going to rip all of this out and redo it all, but we want to make sure that we actually have something running, because I have seen instances where you get the basic app done and then you make some changes and you go to launch, it doesn't work. And you're like, why doesn't this thing work? And it's not because of anything you did. It's because the initial setup had a problem or there's some kind of glitch in the creation of the template. So just make sure that it launches and runs, and we're going to call that good, that yes, we have something in place that's working. So that's it for setting up our initial Blazor server project. Now that we have our Blazor server app done, let's right-click on the solution and add our class library. So new project, we're going to choose a class library project. When you're searching for class library, make sure that you get the class library, which is a .NET Core or .NET Standard library. You do not want to get a Universal Windows library or a .NET Framework library or other library. You want to get the class library that's just class library. That's going to be a .NET Standard or .NET Core library. We're going to choose to call this Suggestion App Library. We hit next, and we get our choice here. Do you want .NET Standard or do you want .NET Core? And I want .NET 6.0, which is the latest long-term support. The only reason I would choose a .NET Standard project is if I was trying to get cross-compatibility, especially for backward compatibility. So if I was doing a Xamarin app as well, I might do a .NET Standard project. Or if I was working with this library with both .NET Framework and .NET Core, then I would choose the .NET Standard. But going forward, we're just using .NET 6 for our main project. Therefore, .NET 6 is great for our class library. It allows us to take advantage of all the cutting edge stuff. Once you get created here, we're going to delete class 1. You could rename this, but I really don't like to. I like to just delete the entire thing. That way you don't accidentally have the file still named class 1 or have other issues. It just keeps things clean and you can start fresh instead of trying to start with a different pattern for your first library or first class versus all the rest of your classes. So I just delete it, and that's how I make sure that I'm starting correctly. Now, since we added these projects in the order we did, the user interface is set as the startup project. However, if it's not bold like this for you, if the class or the suggestion app library, class library is bold instead, then you need to change that. Right-click on your UI and say set as startup project. If the other one is set as startup project, then you will get this error right here where it says a project with output type of class library cannot be started directly. So just right-click on your UI project and set as startup project. So it does depend on the order you add things. Since I add them in the UI and then library order, that set the UI as a startup project. But again, if you do it in the opposite order, that's where you'll get the issues. Ordering does not matter as long as you know how to right-click and say set as startup project. Okay, so that's all we need to do for creating our class library. Before we go any further, I do want to make one more change to our solution, and that is I want to add an editor config. So right-click on the solution and say add new editor config. Now, the first time this error is out on me, that's okay. Close it out, double-click it again. It should open up just fine. So the editor config allows you to make some changes to your solution level if you put it at the solution level, or to the project level if you put it at the project level. So I'm going to choose solution level. That way it affects everything the same. So one of the things I'm going to tweak is tab size. I'm going to change this to 3 and indent size to 3. This just gives me a little bit more horizontal space. Now, since I am recording for video, and since I am trying to zoom in as much as possible to give you the best possible view of what's going on, I'm going to shrink down that horizontal spacing because of the fact that I am taking up so much space by zooming in. So that's why I'm going to go down to 3. I could go to 2, but that's a little bit aggressive. 3 is kind of a compromise here. So normally I'd stay at 4, and I would just have a screen size that fits better with what I'm working on. But for video, it doesn't always translate to a smaller video screen than what I'm working on. So this will make sure that it applies this to anything new. Now, existing things won't have this, and so we'll have to format those documents. But for anything new, that will apply. But also under code styles, we're going to make some changes here. The change I'm going to make here is the namespace declarations here. Right now it's block scoped. I'm going to change that to file scoped. That's the newer way of doing namespacing. And again, it gives you back a lot of horizontal space. And I think it makes it still very, very clean and obvious what's going on. So we're going to choose to use the file scoped namespace declarations instead of the other one, which is block scoped. Okay. The block scoped is what puts the curly braces on and indents everything by those 3 or 4 spaces, whatever you choose. So that's editor config. If you're not familiar with editor config, there are other videos I believe I have on this, but also just check it out. Essentially what it's doing is this is being applied just to your solution, not to every solution that you ever do, just to this solution. That way you can make changes and say, this is the styling for this solution, and then work on a different solution that might have different styling. So just note that you get to choose per solution how you want things to apply instead of all of Visual Studio or every project you work on. This is now just for this solution. So very, very handy, especially when working in different environments for different projects. So we're going to use this to keep everything the same and in line. Again, this file scope namespace will not apply to existing files, but only to new ones, which is okay, but our class library is empty and we're going to get rid of most of the stuff in our Blazor project as well. But that will get things started and set up. Now let's clean up our Blazor project. Our Blazor project comes with some standard stuff. So for instance, we have here under pages, we have this fetch data page. And this is an example of how you could set up a page directive and in dependency injection and using statements and the page title. There's a lot of great examples here of how to set things up, how to use the various parts of Blazor. But we don't need this example for a production app. Therefore, we're going to get rid of this. So let's get rid of this fetch data page. So that's gone. And then let's look at let's get rid of the counter page as well. And then let's go to shared and look at our survey prompt. Let's get rid of that. And then let's go to our index page here. Let's get rid of that survey prompt call. And then let's go to our program.cs and get rid of the weather forecast service. And let's look through and see if there's anything else we have to get rid of. We're pretty close. Oh, data folder. That whole data folder can go, because that's just the service and setup for the weather data. Therefore, that can go as well. I think that's about it, besides the navigation. So navigation, we navigate to the fetch data and counter page. Now, we're going to get rid of navigation entirely, but let's get rid of at least the broken links for now. And then let's launch this to make sure we haven't missed anything. First of all, we want to make sure it builds. And it doesn't. Cool. So let's find out why it doesn't build. The type or namespace data does not exist. Well, let's get rid of that. Let's launch it again and see if it works. And then, yes, it does work. It builds. It's, if we try and go to a /counter, that won't work because it doesn't exist. Nothing at this address, but the home does work. And so we've cleaned out all of the kind of boilerplate stuff from Blazor that we don't need. Okay, let's get rid of all that stuff so we can start fresh with working with Blazor. Now we're gonna get rid of even more eventually, where we'll clean out the navigation. We'll clean out. Well, in fact, you know what? Let's get rid of it now. No reason to have it, so let's get rid of nav menu. We're not going to use it. Get rid of nav menu, and then we go to the main layout, and let's get rid of the navigation bar there. And you know what? We can get rid of the, let's get rid of the about at least. We might need that top bar, so we'll leave that top bar there for now. We might come back and change that, but at least we can get rid of that. And I think that will get rid of everything we need. Let's, yes, I turned it off. It's okay. I could do edit and continue, but we're doing some massive changes here that might need to rebuild anyways. And I just closed it out. So there, our Blazor page is back. I think we're going to modify this as well. So let's get rid of that top bar. Don't think we need that. I could have saved that. I'm in the habit of stopping and restarting, but in that case, I probably could have just made the modification and seen it updated automatically. So the other thing is, under our CSS, there will be some stuff in here that we might have to change, or we might have to remove because it's no longer necessary. But we'll get to that once we get to CSS. Everything else, though, I think is correctly working the way we want it to. And we've gotten down to really what is a very, very simple hello world page. That's it. Now, we'll leave this page in place, but eventually we'll swap over to another page. So we'll get there eventually, but this gets rid of all of that boilerplate stuff in Blazor. All the stuff that comes as a sample to show off what Blazor can do when we're back down to really a good starting point for Blazor. Now let's set up a little bit of organization to our project so that when we actually start putting code in, we can have a good place to settle everything down. So let's start with our class library. We're going to add two folders. We're going to start with the first one we'll call data access. And this is where we're going to put all of our code to talk to MongoDB and get all the information in and out that we need to. And the next folder is going to be our models folder. This is where we'll store all of our models that are specific to data access. So that's really the big deals on the class library side. On the Blazor side, right now we have pages and shared. We're going to add to that as well. So we're going to add a new folder for components. We'll add a folder for models because sometimes we're going to use the models from our class library whenever possible, but sometimes we need UI-specific models. Oops, not a class library. We want to add a folder called models. And then we still have pages and shared. We'll leave those as is, but then in the www root, we're going to add a new folder. And we're going to call this folder images. And I'll leave it all lowercase, and that's going to be in the root of www root. So that will allow us to put some images in that we bring in and use for our project. So I think that's all of the kind of organizational stuff we need to do. I like to get this stuff done up front so you have a good picture of the layout of how we want things to work. We may add things later to this. We may make some changes, but I think this gives us a good structure to start from. And then from there, we can grow and expand as necessary. But this is kind of like our big picture idea of how we want this project to look. Now, one tweak from last time, we had changed this components. I wasn't paying attention closely enough. That goes away, and we add a folder, not a file, a folder called components. There we go. So now we have things set up properly for our structure. Now let's move on to the NuGet packages for our class library. Now we could select the class library here and just paste in, if we already have the package references, we just paste them in here and they'll be brought in. But instead what we're going to do is we're going to right click on dependencies and say manage NuGet packages. And I already know what packages we need for this project. If you don't, that's okay. You can add them as you go. But I figured this way we could put them all in the beginning. That way you can see them all in one spot. You can refer back to them and say, hey, if I'm missing a package here, you can go back and look at this specific video. So there are three we need to add for the class library. The first one is Microsoft.Extensions.Caching.Memory. This will allow us to do in-memory caching. So let's go ahead and install that. Hit OK. And then Microsoft.Configuration.Abstractions. So Microsoft.Extensions.Configuration.Abstractions. Note I'm installing the 6.0.0 version of both of these. Hit OK. And lastly here, what we need to install is the MongoDB.Driver. All right, and this will allow us to talk to MongoDB. So that last one will let us talk to the configuration file. This one allows us to talk to MongoDB. So we'll go over this in just a minute. Yes, I accept. And now we have three things installed. Let's clear the filter here. That's one of the things that always trips me up is I say, oh, I only have one thing installed. No, clear the filter. There you have three things installed. So we have our caching for in-memory caching. That's our NuGet package of that. We have the configuration abstractions. That'll allow the class library to talk to the app settings.json file. That'll be very important for finding configuration information in our class library. And then finally, we have the MongoDB.Driver, which allows us to talk to a MongoDB database. This, of course, is important for actually talking to our data storage and getting information in and out of our MongoDB database. So those are the three packages that will go into the class library project. Now let's add the NuGet packages to our Blazor server project. And this one might surprise you a little bit, so let's go over what these are. So right-click on dependencies of our suggestion app UI project and say Manage NuGet Packages. We're going to browse for Microsoft.Identity.Web. And there's two packages here you want to install. First one is Microsoft.Identity.Web. We'll install that. The latest version is 1.21.1, but you can install the latest version that works for you as long as there's no breaking changes. If there are, you can just roll back to the version I'm using if you want to follow along exactly. It's up to you. So you can choose an older version here if it makes sense, but you shouldn't have a problem with installing a later version until it gets to the 2.0 range. So the other thing is Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. So we didn't have to search for it because it's already in this list on the first page. But again, hit install and hit OK, and I accept. And this will install that package as well. And that's it. Those are all the NuGet packages we need for our UI project, for our Blazor server project, which means we are not going to install any packages for talking to MongoDB. Now, we're very clear here that as we build this project, we're putting all of our data access code into our suggestion app library, not putting it into our user interface. That means we can take this library and use it with other user interface projects the exact same way. So just to be clear, the UI will not know about MongoDB. It will have no clue where our data is getting stored. All it cares about is, I want data, give me data. That's all it's going to ask for. And then the library will handle actually talking to MongoDB. So the only thing we need in the front end is this Microsoft.Identity.Web and Microsoft.Identity.Web.UI. And the reason for these two packages has to do with talking to Azure Active Directory B2C. This is the ability to allow a user to log in, to authenticate via B2C, and then to get some authorization stuff going on. This allows us to have some UI components if we need them for our identity. So that's what we're installing here. That's all we need is the authentication system stuff. That's it. Okay, so that is installing the NuGet packages for our Blazor server project. Now let's connect our two projects. In case you're not familiar, when you put projects into a solution, that does not give them a relationship between each other. So the suggestion app library does not know that the Blazor app library or project exists, and the Blazor app project does not know the library exists at this point. We want to create a relationship here, but the relationship has to be one way only. It cannot be two-way. So in our user interface project, our suggestion app UI, right-click on dependencies and say add project reference and select the suggestion app library. Hit OK. That creates a reference from the UI to the suggestion app library. It does not create a reference the other direction. The library will still never know about the project, the Blazor app project. And you cannot add a reference the other direction. If we tried, this would create a circular dependency. And the reason why it's a big deal is because right now, with the dependency only going one direction, meaning the user interface project relies on the library project. Because that is true, the first thing that has to happen before we can build the UI project, we have to build the library project first and get that DLL. And then we'll take that DLL and use it as a dependency of the UI project, and then we'll build the UI project. If we had to wait for the UI project to build before we could build the library, that wouldn't work because it'd be a circular problem where we can't build anything because they both depend on the other one to be built first. That's why we can only do one direction. That's not a flaw. That's a good thing. We do not want the library to know about the Blazor project.